Hello and welcome to Big Time Strength Podcast. We're actually going video form right now. This is Coach Adam Virgile, and he is a sports scientist who is a guru with Google Spreadsheets and Excel, taking me through. Coach, do you want to start with the question and answer here and then kind of your process with this tutorial?
Sure. Oh, my process. So I think that what we're going to go through here is you're collecting a bunch of data. Maybe I'll click around a little bit if you don't mind. And, you're collecting a bunch of information here. If people can see, it goes through a Google form and there's stuff like trap bar deadlift, bench numbers, all these different metrics. And what we want to do is we want to get this information into a dashboard or one of these dashboards and make it all display so that when you select a different athlete's name, all the information changes to be about that athlete. And then what we also want to do is we want to create a leaderboard of sorts that we could select a test or some other metrics or some other things. And then we'll get a list of the athletes that rank, best in that test kind of on the fly. And you have all this other stuff that's really cool, like strength standards, but we're not going to get into that too much in this one.
Perfect. So what Coach was taking you through was my process. When I have all my athletes come in, like back in the day, it was a clipboard, paper, and then afterwards I would input all that data and it would take forever. I'm not in a position where I have a bunch of graduate assistants or interns or anything like that. It's basically collect all the data from every single one of my athletes and put it in Excel and then work with it. What I really wanted to do was use our tablets or iPads that we have available to us to streamline data input. So grabbing the data was great, but then I wanted to figure out, okay, if I can streamline this, can I streamline working with the data and kind of compiling it? And that's kind of what started this. So if I can take it from a Google form where the kids input the data, I don't even have to do it. I just have to watch the lifts and say yes or no if they did it well or not, and then they input it. And then from there, the steps would just be, okay, let's see what this looks like over time, or let's see what a leaderboard looks like. So those were the options that we're looking for with this.
All right, awesome. So one of the first things I think that is important, and you mentioned this to me, and this was a problem, is this isn't actually related to the dashboard at all, but it's important when you just want to base layer, just look at your information that you have, even if you don't want to create a dashboard. You said something like, talk with me through this, is you have this form, right? And you wanted to just simply get this data into another area that you could sort and filter and such.
Yeah, and update live. And for whatever reason, when I was originally doing this, when I would input something off of a Google form, it wouldn't update live on a different tab. So I was stuck there.
Okay. To do that, I mean, the only way that I know how to do that is using macros. And I don't want to get too intense here, but I think that this is a pretty simple thing that people might be able to do. So I'm going to add in a new sheet, and this is just going to be called, I'm going to call it data 2. And we're not going to use this, but I just want to show people how to do a macro. And this is actually using Google Apps Script, but we're not going to get into the details of that. We're just going to record our screen and let everything happen for us. So what a macro is, at least in this context, is we'll record what we're doing on our screen and we kind of save it as like a process. And then we can just run that process whenever we want on a click of a button, or we can set up a trigger like every time you open the sheet or every time a form submission is accepted, this process runs and gets data going for you. So I'm going to go to this form because what we want this process to do is we want to take the data that you collect in your form, all of it, and put it into a new sheet. And we want to do that pretty much every time that you open this sheet up, right? Because that's, then you'll have an updated data set. So to do that, I believe we're going to go to tools and macros, and we're going to record a macro. And all it's doing is it's going to record our screen, record everything that we're doing on the screen. So it says it's recording the new macro right now. And what I'm going to do on my end is I'm going to hold down Control and Shift and use the arrow keys to move across. to highlight everything in this page except for the headers. Because as we spoke about a little bit, these headers are kind of dynamic. And when you make edits to the form, the headers change and things get kind of crazy. And we want to define our own headers ultimately. So I'm going to hold down Control and Shift and go to the right and go to the right again to go all the way to the right. And then I'm going to hold, and then I'm going to click the down arrow to go to the bottom and click it again to go to the bottom again. And now I'm going to hold down Control and click C to copy everything. And now you can see the little dashed line show up. And I'm going to click on this new sheet that we have here. Select the second row and hold down Control and click V to paste everything. And I'm just going to click Save. That's all we want to do. And I'll call this, I'll just call it copy and paste. We give it a name, and you can give it like a hotkey if you want. And but we'll just call copy and paste and save it. So now, just to show you how this works, I'm going to remove everything on this page. Okay, I'm going to remove everything, and I'm going to do that by holding down Control A, highlight all the stuff, and backspace to remove it. So now this page is blank. And I'm just going to be anywhere. I'll be on the form page. It doesn't really matter where I am. And now we'll go to Tools, Macros. And when we're here, we'll see that we have a new macro called Copy and Paste. And I'm just going to click on it. This will happen every time, the first time that you run a macro. It's essentially giving Google permission to use the macro. So I'm going to continue, and you'll just have to log into your Google account. This only happens the first time, and then it never happens again. So we'll go to Tools, Macros, and we're just going to do it again. It says it's doing its thing, and it's finished. So now all this data is in this page. Now all we have to do here is give names to things. And for time's sake, I'm just going to copy all of your headers that you have right now, and I'm going to paste them in here. And the last thing that we have to do is go to Data, create a filter. And now this data, we can do whatever we want with it. So we could, sort by body weight. We can, filter by the student ID, or you can look at the data however you want. And each time this form updates, then this data will update too, and the headers won't change. And to take this one step further, just in case people are actually going to do this with their data, is we can go to the script editor, and this is where Google Apps Script lives. We're not going to do any actual code editing in here, but I want to go in here for a second so that I can show you how to set up a trigger. Now, all this stuff this is a lot of stuff to look at, but this is the code that got created from us recording our screen. So what we did is we kind of did a front-facing thing, recorded our screen, and all this stuff gets written on the back end. You might notice some things like getting ranges and then copying, copy to, pasting, and that's exactly what we did. Now, if we go over here, we can select triggers. And I'm going to add a new trigger. And it says choose which function to run, and that's because you could have multiple. We have this copy and paste one, which is our macro, and we don't have to worry about this. We don't have to worry about this either. We want it from our spreadsheet. And now it says select event type. So we could have this script run or have this thing update every time we edit the sheet, every time we change something, every time a form is submitted, but we'll say on open. And that's it. And we can click save. Now, every time that this sheet opens up, that thing will run. So to test this, I actually haven't tested this, but I'm just going to remove all the data again that we just put in. I'm going to remove it all, except for the headers. We'll leave them there. And then I'm going to refresh this page. So I'm just going to click enter on this page here. And so that was the macro we're just running. Remember, we removed all the data. And when I refresh the page, that's essentially opening a new sheet. And now all the data is back in. And if you were to add more data to this form, that data would be in here too. And you can do whatever you want with it. You could even add colors to it and such, and it should be okay. But that's not really related to anything that we're doing. I know that you wanted to go through how to do that. So that's at the very least, if you're able to do this, then you can look at your data without anything to do with dashboards. Now let's go to the dashboard. All these things in yellow are things that we kind of want to fill in, and they're based on the data that we're collecting. So the first thing, I guess, is a photo, right, Preston?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so where on your tabs, where is this photo supposed to live on the roster?
If you go to roster, it's on there, and I only have mine so far.
That's perfect. And one thing that's important to note as we go through this is that there are a lot of different ways to do things. I have a certain way of doing things, but you may have a different way of doing things. So when I go to this copy of the dashboard, the way that we get a photo and the way that we're actually going to get all this information across the top is we're going to use two formulas together. They're called index and match. And I'll explain how they work as we go through this. So we'll go equals index, and that's how Google Sheets works with formulas. You type in an equal sign, and that kind of starts, okay, what do you want to do here? And what index does is it essentially takes information and you tell it the row and the column that you want to get the information from, and it'll bring that back. And in this case, we want the photo. So equals index, the first thing is the reference. That's what we want to bring back. And what I want to bring back is if I click on roster, I want to bring back the photos, which is something in here. We don't know which photo to get because if we select a different athlete, we'll want a different photo. We only have one right now, but we'll want a different photo if we select a different athlete. Now, comma, the row number is, okay, well, what row number do you want to get it from? We could simply type in row 2 and then comma, column 1, which would just mean that we're looking for something in here. We want the photo from row 2, which is right here in the photo that we want, and column 1, which is we're only looking at one column, so it's always column 1 if you're looking at one. And if we close this off and click enter, we'll get the photo in row 2. However, if we switch a name on this sheet, let's say, to someone else, the photo won't change. That's because we just told it the row and the column that we want without it being dynamic. So what we want to do is we want to use a function called match, which says, instead of just telling me the row to get, I want to match it to something, or I want to put a piece of criteria in there to tell me where to go. So after we say what we want, instead of typing in the row number 2, we're going to say match, open parenthesis. I'm saying, okay, what are you going to try to match here? Well, we want to match this person's actually ID, which we don't have yet. Or I guess we could use name for now. So we'll match the name, comma. Now to what? Well, we need to match the name to, and we go to our roster, to the names in here. And then comma 0, and we'll close off. That just means it has to be an exact match. We don't need a column because there's only one column. What we're essentially saying is we want to get something. We want to get an image from column J, and we want the row to be whichever row matches the name that we selected in our dashboard. And that will happen to be row 2 because this name is in row 2 and it matches the one in our dashboard. So if we now close this off and click enter, we'll notice the picture is still here. But if we change a name to someone else, the picture is gone. And if we were to just type something in, I'm just going to type something in here. I'll type in hello into this cell. And if we go back to our dashboard, that's what our image is for this person, but it's whatever's in that cell will show up. And this is important to understand because we're going to use this to get all this information about the person that we're looking for. So one thing that's helpful when you're using formulas in lots of places is putting dollar signs around them. And what that does is it locks in the columns and the rows that you're using. So if I were to copy this formula as it is and paste it, this is a merged cell. If I were to, I'm just going to paste it in here. If I were to copy this formula and paste it somewhere else, it shifts everything around. It's not the same columns that I was looking at. And the way that we fix that is, I'll do it in this one, is we need to lock in the columns with dollar signs before them. So I'm going to lock in all this stuff with dollar signs and click enter. And now when I copy and paste this formula over here, nothing will change. So the references won't move. And that's important because now things are really easy. Essentially, to get the student ID, we want to do the exact same thing that we did to get to the picture, except we don't want the picture anymore, which is in column J. Instead, we want the student ID, which is in column H or A. Which one do you think, Preston?
Well, either one works. And the reason why I did it was because I was using VLOOKUP earlier, and this index and match looks a lot better because now I don't have to, long story, but this is better. So
okay.
You can even delete H and just use A if you wanted to.
Okay, so we'll use A then.
Okay.
So then instead of looking in column J, we'll just say, all right, now we want whatever's in column A for the row of the person that we select. And if I click enter, there's our student ID. And now it's mostly a copy and paste job. So we can copy the formula, paste to the grad year, and we'll just say, okay, what column is the grad year in? It's in E, and then gender is F, date of birth is G. I'm gonna try to remember that. I don't know if I will, but if we go to the copy of the dashboard, now instead of looking at A, we want E, which is the year. Click enter, you can copy this, paste it to the gender, E and then F for the gender, and copy and paste it to the date of birth. And we can do G. Body weight's a little bit different, and we'll get to that later. But there we go. And now this is all dynamic stuff. So if I select Preston here, we should see some things change. And maybe if I select a female, we'll see other things change. So now we have a kind of a dynamic way of getting data for this athlete. I'll go back to you because you have a cool photo there. And now the next thing that I kind of want to tackle here is getting the most recent results. And this is going to get pretty complicated because to get the most recent results, you need to know what the most recent date is for each of the tests that you're talking about. And typically I'll set this up in another area, but we can do this here for now. I want to start with getting the most recent date because it'll make things a lot simpler in the when we go through the whole formula, and you'll see what I mean. To get the most recent date, we can use a formula called max ifs, which is getting the maximum of something with criteria. So we'll go equals max ifs, open parenthesis, in this cell here, I'm just adding in. Now, what do we want to get the maximum of? Well, we want to get the maximum of the dates. So I'm going to go to our data tab here and select our dates. Comma, because now it says, okay, we get it. You want the maximum date. But if we just got the maximum date, you know, that's not necessarily tied to Preston. And it's certainly not tied to the test that we're interested in. So we want the maximum date when certain things are true. And now it's asking us for a criteria range and then a criterion. So that's our first kind of what needs to be true for this date to come out. The first thing that needs to be true is this person's name, or we could use a student ID. I guess we'll use a student ID now. When the student ID, which is in column B, comma, is equal to, now we'll go back to our dashboard, equal to this ID here, comma, and also when this test, or actually we don't have to do the test. I have a different idea. what we can just say is, because we know that based on the way that Preston collects his data, is that this test, if there's this test here, there will be data in the cells associated with that test. So what we can pretty much say is when this trap bar deadlift max value, because that's where we're looking in, when this is comma, quote, greater than 0, end quote, and close that off and click enter. And I don't know, let me see if this is a white. There we go. So yeah, the text was white, but let's format this as a date. And we'll make this smaller so we can see it. So what this is telling us is that the last time Preston's trap bar deadlift was greater than 0, or the last time he did this test was on this date. And this is going to be part of our formula when we get the current results, because we need his 1 repetition maximum, not just the current date or the most recent date, but we want to get his 1 repetition maximum for the most recent date. So to do that, we're going to, there are a lot of different ways we can do it. I like to use a function called average ifs. And one of the reasons why is because it's interchangeable with max ifs. They all work the same way. So if you know how max ifs works, you know how average ifs works, and you know how sum ifs works, and min ifs. There's a consistent format to it. So you can learn a lot of formulas just by knowing kind of how one thing works. So to get this trap bar 1RM, we can go equals average ifs, open parenthesis, and now it's what do you want the average of? Just like what do you want the max of? And what we want the average of is, if we go back to our data, so we want the average of the trap bar deadlift max, comma, now when what is true. And the reason, let me just take a step back. The reason why average works is because there's only one item per date for a trap bar deadlift max. If there were a multiple, let's say that he tested trap bar deadlift max twice in a date, then we'd get the average of those 2 values. But because there's just one value, getting the average is the value itself. So that's important to recognize. And we want to get the average of the trap bar deadlift when the student ID, which is in column B, comma, is equal to the student ID of the athlete that we select, which is right here. We already did that. Comma, and also when, if we go back to our data, when the date, comma, is equal to, and we'll go back here, most recent date that they did that lift to get their most recent trap bar 1RM. So I'm going to click on this date here and close this off and click enter. And I'll need Preston to confirm whether or not that's correct. But this would be his trap bar 1RM. And let's say that we didn't have this date here. This is why I wanted to do this at the beginning, is instead of looking for when the date in the data set is equal to this maximum date here, we can take the formula that we wrote to get this maximum date and insert it where we refer to it and click enter. And now this formula, it's big, it's scary, but it's not contingent on this date being there. We can remove it and it's a standalone thing. I'm going to leave this date in here for now. And I'm also going to lock in all of these cells so that I can copy them and paste them around so that we can get the other data that we need. We only really need to do this once, more or less, for the entire row here. Now I want to do something else. So this is, again, this is going to get complicated. To get his RSS, which is, it's the relative strength score. Is that right, Preston?
Yep.
We need his body weight for the date that this lift occurred, so that we can, because and Preston and I were talking about this off air a little bit, is that, you know, if we took someone's just body weight, their general body weight, and were divide all their results by whatever that body weight is, you know, someone could have gained 10 pounds in a year. And if you're comparing, you know, their trap bar 1RM at the end of the year with their trap bar at the beginning, and you're using the same body weight, that may not be an accurate relative strength score, just because of the weight change. So what we're going to do to get the average body weight is I'll use this cell, or the most recent body weight, is we'll go equals average ifs, and we've already done this. Actually, I'm changing my mind. I'm going to copy the formula that we have in here because it's exactly the same. We're getting the average trap bar deadlift. And if we paste this in here, instead of getting the average trap bar deadlift for the most recent date, we want to get the most recent, or the average body weight for the most recent date, where the trap bar deadlift is greater than 0, so that they're both on the same date. And if I go to the data, we just have to find out what column that is. And it's column I. Before, we were looking at column X because we were looking at the trap bar deadlift max. Now we'll look at column I. So if we go back to this dashboard, we'll just change X in here to I and click enter. And we'll change this XX to I and click enter. And that should be his most recent body weight. Not necessarily when the trap bar deadlift was, when he did the trap bar deadlift, but at least it's his most recent. So I would probably, like I said before, I'd probably set up a different area to kind of do some of this stuff, but we're doing it on the fly right now. Now, all we have to do is, if we copy our trap bar deadlift 1RM data and paste it in here, we have the body weight, and all this number is this number, which is this formula that we just copy and pasted here, divided by this number, which is this formula that we have in here. So again, it's going to be really big and scary, but we can copy this formula, for the most recent body weight, go into this cell and divide it by that formula and click enter. And now there are a lot of decimals here. Let's bring them down, but that would be the relative strength score. And something that I always do here, and I always do it at the end too, is I do something called if error, which if there is an error somewhere, you'll get an ugly looking error message. I like it to be blank so that I don't see anything for aesthetic reasons. So what we can do is, before this entire massive formula, we go if error, open parenthesis. And what this formula does is it essentially says, okay, if there's an error with anything going on in here, what do you want to happen? So I could say, comma, quote, no data, but I'm just going to do quote, which is blank, and close it off and click enter. And I'll do the same thing here. Just if there's an error, we'll do comma, blank, and close that off. And now, you know, we're pretty good here. The only things that we have to do now are copy and paste these things and change what we're looking at. So if I were to copy these over into the bench area, that's all fine. We just need to know what column the bench numbers are in. So if we go back to this data tab here, we look for the bench max, that's column Y. All we have to do now is change the column X's to column Y's, and everything else remains the same. Oops, I shouldn't have done that for, let's do it for this one. Now let's do it for this one. So we have to change it in two places. The first is for what we're looking for, and then when column Y is greater than 0, and that would be your most recent bench 1RM projected. And now we do the same thing here. We change the X's to Y's, and we change the X's to Y's for when it's greater than 0. Click enter. And now we have the bench data. And I don't know if do you want me to keep on going through the rest of them?
Nope. Nope. It makes total sense. That's great.
Okay. Perfect. The previous results is something that's an even bigger animal than this. So I'm not sure if we want to get into that. But so to get the session before this latest session, you would need to have a table of pretty much the most recent dates for each lift. But if you wanted to just get the average of all the previous results, I can show how to do that very quickly, which is just, you would copy these formulas, or at least copy this formula and paste it up, because we copied everything, or we made everything locked in. And now, instead of having, so let me go through this formula so everyone understands it. Don't worry about this, but we're getting the average of data X to X, which is, we're getting the average trap bar deadlift max when B to B, which is the name or the student ID, is equal to L4, which is the student ID of the person that we pick, and when the date in the data set is equal to the maximum date in the data set for the person that we pick. Now, instead of the date being equal to the maximum date, we can do quote less than quote ampersand, which is just saying now we want to get this data for, we want to get the average trap bar 1RM for when the date is less than the most recent date that for this person that we pick, and we can click enter. And now that would be your average trap bar 1RM for all prior dates combined. And you would just do the same thing with this one here. So if we select a different athlete now, who has data in here?
Do like Brady Ketchum.
So we'll select Brady Ketchum. And the reason I'm assuming is that these two are the same is because they actually are the same. Yep. Generally, I would fact check. Like, one thing that you should do is when you're writing these formulas anytime is pick a use case, go into the data set, and that's actually one of the big advantages of having something like this, like you have, Preston, is we can kind of say, okay, let's clear all this out and let's just look for Brady. And we're looking at trap bar deadlift stuff. So let's just look for the trap bar deadlift. And sure enough, here are the 2 dates that he did it. And his maxes are both exactly the same, so that makes sense. And if we were just to switch to you, Preston, just for Preston, click OK. And again, let's kind of clear all these things, and let's look for the trap bar deadlift only. Click OK. We can see your most recent one, which we had before, 498.2. If we go to the copy of the dashboard, and let's just select Preston again in here, we got 498.2. And then the average of all your previous ones is 509, give or take. And if we look back at your previous ones, looks about right.
Yep, that makes total sense. By the way, if you're a viewer on this, all the data in there was kind of just thrown in. It's not my students' actual data, and most of this data that I threw in for myself would it's all messed up too from dates. Just a heads up for people. And then, Coach, this is perfect. I think A16 would actually fill out perfectly U4. What you have there would actually fit my box up top exactly.
This one right here, so when you copy it in and paste it in there.
Yep. And you knocked out.
And then I'll just remove the formatting from this because we don't need these. And you could certainly use these if you didn't want these formulas to be so long and overwhelming.
That was
so
see that process.
Okay. So what are you thinking? What are you thinking now? Try to do the leaderboard stuff, or do you have other thoughts on this page?
What you did with this is perfect. Maybe if you scroll down a little bit, just show like the mindset right there, strength scores, and then it's got trap bar deadlift, bench press, barbell split squat, and then I'm just gonna have charts that are referenced eventually. So what I'll be doing is like using the data that I have, and I'll pull them into these charts and see like over time, what's my trend, and still working on formatting and all that type of stuff. But what students will be able to see is their best one, their previous score, and then obviously over time. So from when they're freshmen to seniors, they can see their trend going on all on one sheet is the goal, is what I'm looking for. Yep. But Coach, if you want to head over to the leaderboard, that'd be awesome.
Okay. This is going to be, so to do this, we need to set up another table of things. So let me just see. I'm going to create a new sheet again, and I'm just going to call this Leaderboard Data. And what we need to get here is we need to get a list of the athletes and their best for every single lift, because then we'll use that to generate our leaderboard. And the way that we get a unique list of athletes, or a list of all of our athletes that we have in general, is we can use a function called unique. And these are really good functions to know. So far, all the stuff that we've gone over, I would encourage you to look more into these, because these are the functions that I use all the time. There are only a couple of them. There's like the average ifs, max ifs, that kind of combination of things, the index and match, and then unique, filter, and sort. And those are all the functions that we're using today. Those are the main ones. So the first thing that we want to do here is we want to get a list of all of our athletes, and not just any list, a list that updates when we add more athletes into the system. And the way that we can do that is we can use a function called unique. So I'm just going to do equals unique, open parenthesis, and let's see what it needs. It needs a range. That's the only thing that it needs. When you're looking at these formulas, actually Google Sheets is really good at kind of describing stuff that goes on, and anything in brackets is an optional thing. So we just need a range of data to get a unique list of something. So I'm going to go to our data tab, and I'm just going to select this name column here and close the parenthesis and click enter. And now we have a unique list of all of our athletes. And there are a couple of other things going on here, but that's all okay. Because what we can do is we can combine the filter function into this. And the filter function, it's just like putting a filter on a table like we were doing earlier when we were looking at Preston's data. It's essentially putting a filter on things. And for me, I want a unique list of athletes, but I don't want this header in here. I mean, we could have it in here. It doesn't really matter. But the way that we would do this is we would say unique filter. And the way that filter works is the same way as unique, but you give it a range and then you give it a condition, like I want all this data, but only when something is true or when something is not true. And we want the same data that we want for the unique, but a condition that we want to be true is when this data does not equal, which is a less than and greater than sign back to back, the header row. And we can just close that off and click enter. And now that row is gone, and we just have a list of our athletes. And one interesting thing about these, a couple formulas, the unique and the filter and the sort, all three of those, is that you only will see them in one cell. So if I click on this cell, it'll just show the name. But what will happen is these require space to operate. So for example, if it pretty much automatically spills down a list of the unique athletes. And if it can't create the full list, it'll give you an error. So for example, if I have something typed into this cell, I just have hello typed into this cell kind of randomly, this function isn't going to work because it's getting blocked by something. So that's an important consideration to make. If I remove it, it'll work fine. So if you have a list of athletes that will continue to grow, you don't want to have, let's say, this list of athletes and then have, averages, and then have averages going across here, because then if you add in a new athlete, this list won't work. That's an important thing to note about unique and filter functions. But now I'm just going to drag the formula, drag it all down a little bit. I'll call this name. And now what we want to get, like I said earlier, is we want to get the best performance for every lift that's important that we want to pick from. Let me just go to the leaderboard for a second, that we want to pick from for our tests in the leaderboard so that we can display the top people in whatever test we want. To do that, what we're going to do is we're going to copy all of the, and this is more for efficiency and speed than anything else. You'll see that the outcome is a little bit different than what we put in here. But let's go to the let's see, what's in the data tab. All right, so let's go to the data tab and let's copy all of these headers in here. It includes some stuff we care about, some stuff we don't, but we'll copy all the headers and go to our leaderboard data where we're putting in the data. And I'm just going to paste them in because I'm kind of lazy. I don't really care about the formatting right now. And we're going to get the best value for each of these. And body weight, there isn't really a best value, but we're just going to use max ifs like we've used already. And in each of these circumstances, we're going to use max ifs or min ifs, essentially saying we want the maximum value when the athlete's, when the athlete's name in the database is equal to the athlete right here. So, equals max ifs. It won't make sense for body weight, but you'll see what happens here. So we want to get the maximum value, and let's go to our data. In this column, because that's where our body weights are. So we want the maximum value here, comma, when, and remember, we need to give a criteria and criterion. So we want the maximum value when the athlete's name in our database, comma, is equal to, and let's go back to our leaderboard, our leaderboard data, is equal to this person right here. And we can close that off and click enter. And there's this person's maximum body weight in the data set. And what I'm going to do now is I should probably write some rule. What I always do is I'll write some rules around errors and things like that. I don't want to make this too complicated, but I'll go through it maybe after I do this stuff. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to lock in the A, but not the 3. The reason why, and we're not going to want to lock in anything else except for these E's. The reason why is because I'm going to drag this formula or copy it across. And what I want to happen is we want the maximum body weight when the athlete in the database is equal to this athlete here. And I want this metric to move alongside as I move it because once I get into this column, I want the maximum trap bar deadlift weight and trap bar reps and such. But I don't want a reference to the athlete and where the athlete lives in the database to move because I never want to change that, what I want if that makes sense. And I'm not locking in the 3 because when I copy this formula down, I want it to apply to the athlete in that row. And if I were to lock in this number 3 here and set the row stagnant and copy and paste it down, then we're always going to be looking at this person here, whoever's in A row 3. So I'm going to undo that. And now, one thing that you'll want to consider is right now we have the maximum body weight for each of these athletes. But to make this a dynamic leaderboard and make everything dynamic is what I do is I copy this formula and I paste it all the way to the bottom of the sheet. And what I did there just for like a hotkey thing is I held down Control Shift and the down arrow brings you to the bottom of your data set. And I just held down Control Shift and the down arrow again to bring me to the bottom of the page. And now click Control and V to paste the formula in there. Oops, I forgot to unlock the, sorry about that. I forgot to unlock the 3 before I did that. We should see errors or zeros or something. So I'll paste it again and we'll get zeros. Now, this is important because if I were to have another athlete in here, like let's say I just type in, let's say I type in this athlete again.
SEN. Yeah, it's a weird last name. Sorry.
Oh, my bad. Or type in this athlete again, you know, then we'll get their weight again. Or if you add more athletes to your database, you'll get their maximum, whatever this is. Now, because I'm very particular and I hate zeros, I said I wasn't going to do it, but I actually am before I drag this across, is I'm going to say if open parenthesis, and if just works pretty much, you give it a condition. So if something is true, then do this. If it's not true, then do this or do something else. So I'm going to say if this formula, if the max ifs formula that we have equals 0, because we see that it does at times, equals 0, comma, then I want it to be blank, which is a double quote, comma, if not. So if this formula does not equal 0, then I just want to do the formula, if that makes sense, and close it off and click enter. And then if I copy it and paste it down to the bottom, now I don't have any zeros and it's just blank because I don't like looking at zeros. So now what we've done is we've done this formula in a kind of a smart way where we've locked things in, and we should be able to copy this. And I'm going to hold down Control, Shift, and the right arrow, just highlighting everything. And I'm going to go back a little bit and paste it. Now what I've done is we've applied this formula to every single metric in our in our database, essentially, in that data tab. And what we can do now is we can copy all these formulas, and I'm going to hold down Control, Shift, and the down arrow to get to the bottom and paste. And it's just loading a little bit. And now we have all the data for everybody. We have all the maximums for everybody. And this isn't exactly what we want. I'm going to remove the stuff right now that we don't need. Like the reason why I kept everything like this is so that I could copy and paste the formulas and just do it once. Whereas if I had manipulated the columns at the beginning, we'd be looking at the wrong metrics and it would be all be messed up. So I don't think that we need body weight, or I'll leave body weight because it could be important. But we don't need any of this stuff, any of these weights or reps, because we have the maxes. So I'm going to delete them. And we don't need these weights or reps. So I'm going to delete them. And we don't need this column. I'm going to delete it. So now we kind of have more of a succinct table of all the bests, except we need to consider that these data points here, the flying 10, 10-yard dash, pro agility, higher is not better. We want the minimum values. So what we're going to do is we are going to change this max ifs. And like I said, again, we can just change it around. We can say min-ifs instead of max ifs. And then all of a sudden, you know, we have interchangeable formulas. If you wanted to do this a different way, you wouldn't have that luxury. So we'll change max to min and max to min. Click enter. And now we have this person's minimum time. And because we're lucky and these three columns are back to back anyways in our data set, I'm fortunate in that I could copy this formula and paste it here and paste it here. And these should be the minimum values for this person of all time. And we can copy these cells now. And I'm just going to paste them to the bottom like I did with the other formulas. And let's go back to the top. And now this is actually pretty valuable in itself, right? Now you have a list of your athletes that automatically updates and all the metrics that you care about, and you quickly see their personal bests in everything. And that could be relevant, especially if you put some colors to it, conditional formatting, which we're not really going to get into here, but there's a lot of stuff on conditional formatting out there. And we're going to use this data set that we have to create our leaderboard. And this leaderboard thing is really, really complex. So I hope I don't screw it up. Something that takes me a little while. So let's go to our leaderboard now. And we're going to use those same functions that we did before. And we're going to introduce a new one called sort, or actually in our case, we're going to use sort n. The difference between the two is sort, you just sort things. Sort n means you can like select the top 5. You select the top number that you want to sort. So like, let's say I just want to show the top 10 or the top 20. we could do that. Whereas if you just use the sort function, you don't have the opportunity to say how many at the top that you want. And like we went through earlier, that could create a problem, especially if you have data underneath here, because sort is one of those functions where it'll keep on going down. And if you have something typed in underneath, it'll break. So now what I want to do here is, this is actually very, very important. We're going to use this test selector because we want to get the best for whichever test that we want. I'm not going to worry about these selectors right now, but with the test selector, I'm going to color this box in yellow just so we know that it's kind of important. And we're going to create a drop-down list of tests. And this drop-down list of tests, this is also important because we're going to use something, we're going to use index and match again. And it goes by column headers. So we're going to do data validation to create a list. It says list from a range. And I'm going to say reject input, which means if we try to type in something that is not what we specify here, then it'll give us an error. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it'll break anyways and you'll just get confused. So we'll select the range of data that we want, and we'll go to our leaderboard data. And the things that we want to select from are these things, which are our column headers. And click OK and save. And if we go to our leaderboard, now we have a drop-down list of all those things. And this is cool because we can actually control what this, let's say that you said, you know what, trap bar deadlift max is kind of too long. I don't really want to select from that name. I don't want to show up here. Then what you could do is you go to your leaderboard data, maybe just call this TBDL, and we'll just call this bench. We'll call this hang clean and maybe split squat. And if we go back to our leaderboard now and we go to our test selector, that's what's in there now. And it matches up with those headers. So we don't have any type of conflict between what's in the drop-down list and what those headers are, which would cause errors in what we're about to do. So this is going to get, again, I apologize in advance because it's going to get really complicated, but we're going to go equals sort n, open parenthesis. And this looks like a lot, but what it is, this is essentially like in its simplest form is you tell it what to sort, a range of stuff to sort. The n is how many you want in that list. So if you want the top 5, this number would be 5. And display ties mode is, do you want to display the people that are tied, or do you just want to cut it off? So let's say that we wanted to sort all the trap bar deadlifts and we wanted to see the top 5. If we had displayed ties mode on and the 5th, 6th, and 7th place, all of the same numbers, we'd actually have 8 rows there. So they display the ties. And then the sort column is, which column do you want to sort by? If you have multiple things in there, do you want to sort by column 1 or column 2? Like you could, for example, you could bring back the trap bar deadlift maxes and the bench press maxes. And then it's kind of like, all right, well, do you want to sort it by the trap bar or the bench press? Pick one. And is ascending is just, do you want to go from top to bottom or bottom to top, lower to higher, higher to lower? So what we're actually going to do is we're going to wrap a filter function in here. So we're going to say sort and filter because I'm going to pretty much control a bunch of things in here. The reason why, and I'm actually going to X out for a second, is we want one list of names here, and we want to control it with a test. And right now in our leaderboard data, there's different data in each of these columns. So we kind of need to, like I said before, this range, if I go to sort n and I open up this range will bring back as many columns as you tell it to. And actually, maybe I'll just to show you what I'm talking about here is I'll let me just unmerge these cells, and I think this will work, but we'll see. We'll sort n, and we'll select these columns, comma, and we'll say we want the top 5, and display ties mode, I'll just say false, and sort column will be 2 and true. I'm just kind of making this up as I go along. And if I click enter, see, so we selected B through E, that many columns. And the only point of me doing this is saying that's how many columns will be brought back. So there are actually 5 columns being brought back here, and because their cells merged, it kind of brought these down lower. But anyways, we just want 1 column brought back. We don't want 5. So to do that, we need to introduce the filter function into here so that we can filter out some stuff. I'm just going to undo all this stuff, keep these cells merged. We'll go to equals sort n, open parenthesis, and we'll say filter again, open parenthesis. And what we want to show up are the names. But at the same time, we need to get the test that we're interested in. So the way that we're going to have to do this is we can't just pick a column. So for example, I'm going to use a curly square bracket. And what this does is it allows us to pick columns that are non-adjacent to each other. Before, we selected that range from B to E, and maybe we want one column, column A, which is the names, and column F, which is trap bar deadlift, who knows. But this just allows us to pick 2 columns that aren't next to each other. And the first column that we want to bring back, and the one that we actually want to display here, is going to be the names. So when I go to my leaderboard data, I want to display this column, which is A3 to, I'm just going to say A1000, in case we have 1,000 names, comma, and the second column we want to display, for now, I'm just going to type in B3 colon to B, oops, I guess I should make sure that the sheet is specified, B3 to B1000. And we can close that off.
Can you leave the 1,000 off and then it's unlimited, or how does that work?
With the combination of these things, it's best to keep. I don't think it would work if you just did the unlimited.
Okay.
I don't know why, but I think like the rows have to match up exactly, and then when you're doing what we're about to do, it gets a little bit finicky. So we'll take those 2 things, and now we'll just say, or actually I'll just do the whole thing straight up, because if we were to do these 2, let's say that we were to select these 2 columns. Well, this is not dynamic to the test that we select. We're just selecting 2 columns here. And what we need to get is we need to get the data for the column of the test that we select. So the way that we do that is we use index and match again. So we're going to index, open parenthesis, and this is for the second column of data that we want. We want to index B3. I'm going to go all the way to K3. So, but it's actually to K1000 because we need the data beneath that. So we want to get something in here, something in that purple space that you see, comma. And now, which row do we want? Well, the row doesn't matter because we're actually bringing back all of it because we want all the rows because all the people are in all the rows. But we do want to specify the column. So we'll do comma. And now, before we were matching on a row with this index, we're saying we want the row to be dynamic based on the player, whichever row the person is that we select, we want to get that data. Now we don't care about the row because we're bringing back everything in to the column that we pick in the test selector so that it picks the right column to get the data from. So we'll go match, open parenthesis. Now the search key here is in our leaderboard. We want whatever this test is, comma, and we want to match that to, and we'll go to our leaderboard data. All of these column headers, so we want to match whatever's in that our test selector to the column headers to get the column number that we're going to get the data from, comma 0, an exact match. And we'll close off that curly square bracket. Those are the 2 columns that we want data from. And now if we do a comma, oops, I need to put in another parenthesis to close off the index function. And that's another nice thing about Google Sheets is it kind of tells you where you're at. Now, comma, what we're going to do is we're going to, if we do it like this, we're going to get a lot of blanks because, and sometimes blanks count as zeros. So if you're sorting things, especially a minimum one, where if you're looking at like the best people in pro agility, for example, it might bring back a bunch of blanks as the top people in the list. So now we're onto the conditions of the filter, which like we did before, we're saying, you know, what do we want and what don't we want? Well, in this case, I'm going to copy exactly what we just did for this column thing to get this column and paste it here. And I'm going to say when this data in the column that we want is not equal to blank. That's the first condition so that we don't bring back blank values. And maybe that's it. I'm just going to close this off for now, close off that filter function. And I know this is getting really complex, but now all of this that we just did, that just defined our sort range or the data that we want. And now we tell it how many we want and which column to sort by and other things. So for now, I'm just going to do comma 5. We'll bring back the top 5, comma. Display ties mode, I'm going to say false, which means we don't want ties to show up, comma. Now the sort column. We only have 2 columns. I'm going to pick column 2 because the first column is the name and the second column is the actual data that we care about. So we want to sort it by the data that we care about to get the list based on the data that we care about. That makes sense. Sorted that way, comma. The last thing is ascending. Do we want that to be true or false? For now, I'm just going to say true and close this off. And we'll see what happens here. And it looks like I didn't do something right as I would kind of expect. I think it's this parenthesis here because I copied and pasted from somewhere. And I'll click enter and maybe it wasn't. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to change these to B2 because I find it really finicky with ranges, and we'll see if this does that fixes it. Nope, it doesn't. So
longest formula I've seen. So
yeah, no, I'm working through it. I'll get there. I just need to look really quickly. Okay. No, I know what I did wrong. Nope, never mind, that's not. Just look back. Just look back here. I should delete this top row here. And go to the leaderboard, A1 to A1000, B1 to K1000, B1 to K1. Oh, all right. I'm so sorry. The first thing that I should have done, and this happens to the best of us, I think, is before I do any of this stuff, let me just undo what I just did, just to make sure that I'm not crazy. I need to select a test. So let's say the trap bar deadlift, because we have that. And now there's an actual error, which is actually a better sign than before. And now if I change these to B2, we'll see what happens. And I don't know if it'll do anything, but nope. But that is it's a good thing to do, is always pick the test first. And let's go back to this data. Let's try to remove this. I know I'm missing. Oh, that's what happens when I mess around too much with stuff. Okay, so here's our list. Lots of parentheses. I messed around with too many different things. And a lot of that honestly isn't necessary. So I'm gonna undo what I did before and just go back where we had it kind of the way it was. And what I did is at the very beginning, before I selected a test, I messed around too much. But if I do select a test and I had it the way that it was at the beginning, it's all fine. It'll show the top 5. But right now, there's no way to tell whether or not this is accurate. So just to check whether this is accurate, and you could actually use this formula if you wanted to bring in the data, but we can use index match again here. So here are our names of people. Well, equals index, open parenthesis. And what we want to pull back is we want to pull back the data for this test for each of these people so that we can actually see whether or not this is sorted, whether or not there's an actual top bottom list. And so let's go to our leaderboard data, and we'll kind of select all of these columns because we want something in here, comma, and then we're going to match, because again, we're going to get the row for the person in question. So, but this time we're going to do a double match, which will be fun. So we're going to match and go to the leaderboard. This person, whoever this is, comma, 2, and this is to get the row. We want to get the row of this person when they match up with this person in here, comma, 0, close a parenthesis. Now we're going to match again, because not only do we want to get the row of that person, but we also need to get the data from the column that we picked as our selector. So we'll do comma, and now in our index, we have the reference, we have the row, now we're going to get the column. So we'll go match, open parenthesis, and to get the column, we need to match, let's go to our leaderboard, match this here, comma, to our column headers right here, comma, 0, and close the parenthesis, I hope, and click enter. And that's, I'm just going to lock some things in so that I can copy and paste this down so that we can actually see the data for the people that we need. And we went through locking. That's why I'm not going through it right now, because we have it. So I'll paste this down. And now you'll notice that this data, well, number one, let's just try to pick a different test, like the flying 10, the 10-yard dash. And notice it's sorted it's sorted bottom to top. Now, because there are metrics that are, I want to go over two things with this formula to make it more dynamic for you. Because these metrics are sometimes lower is better, sometimes higher is better, you might want to sort it differently depending on the metric that you select. So in this formula that we have, notice that we typed in, with this sort n, we typed in the number of people that we wanted, and we typed in true for is ascending, which is right here. Instead of having this be true, what we can do is we can go to insert, and I'm just picking this cell here. It could be somewhere on your dashboard that makes sense. We're going to insert a checkbox. Now, checkbox is essentially a true false marker. See how I'm clicked on this cell and it says false? If I click it, now it says true. So instead of, in our formula, saying true straight up, like we want this to be true, I'm going to remove that and say, I want this to be whatever the checkbox says it is, and click enter. And right now I just have to, now what I'm noticing is that the name is coming through too. And this is good because it's part of troubleshooting. And this is more advanced than we need to get into. But in this filter function, we gave one condition, comma, I want to give another condition. And that condition is going to be when, I'm just going to go leaderboard A1 to A1000 is not equal to, or A2 to A1000 is not equal to leaderboard A2, which is like we did before. All I'm saying is I don't want the header in there, and click enter. And now that gets rid of the header row when we sort it a different way. So now if we click this checkbox, we can quickly switch the sort of the list. So, maybe in this context, we want it bottom to top. And then if we pick vertical jump, I guess that's not a very good example, or that one. If we pick trap bar, then we can just say, all right, we want to sort it the other way. And now we have a different list of people. So the second thing that I want to do is, instead of this 5 here, and I know this formula is monstrous, I get it, and it's confusing for me also. Instead of this n being typed in as 5, What if we just said, I want to choose how many people to show up and I want it to be dynamic. I'm just going to type in the number 5 here. And instead of this being equal to 5, we can do the same thing that we just did. Instead of it being equal to 5, I want it to be equal to whatever the cell says it is. And click enter. And now I'm just going to drag this formula down further so that it could accommodate for more people potentially. Don't worry about the errors. I didn't, think about that or care about that right now. But if we change this formula to say, I don't know, 6, well, there's another person added to the list. If we say 8, I don't know how many people we have in the database, but they're the top 8, right? Oh, there are 10, so we can just say, all right, the top 10. And now we have the top 10. And I'm not going to go through the selectors, but essentially what you would do is with this filter function, and it's too confusing to look at right now, but you know how I added in this comma when it's not equal to the header? Yeah. Maybe I'll try one. I haven't actually tried this, but this grad year, I'm not sure if there's enough data. I'd have to look at the athletes. Gender, there might be enough. So we'd have to do 2 things. The first is we'd have to add gender to this thing here, which is pretty easy. I'll do that quickly. And you probably could have guessed it. We're going to do an index match. So I'm just going to insert a column here. I hope that doesn't screw up the leaderboard. Let me just check. Okay. And I'm going to say gender. So the important thing with this is that whatever selectors you want, you're going to need that data in this leaderboard data area. So I'm going to do equals index match, and I'm not going to talk too much about it. I'm just going to do it. Equals index, and what we're going to do is we're going to go to our roster and get the gender, comma, match, open parenthesis, and we're going to match the gender in our roster to the athlete right here, comma, and now we're matching the athlete right here to the athlete in our roster to get the row for that gender, comma, 0, and we'll close it off and click enter. And I'm just going to lock some things in real quick. And I'm going to copy this formula and paste it down, at least to the, and we'll get, I don't want to get errors, so I'll just paste it down for all the people that we have. And that should be the gender of each person. And now if we go to our leaderboard, and I'm just going to type in M for now. And I'm actually going to type in 5 here because I don't know how many males there are. Now we can add in another piece of criteria, I hope at least, comma. And if we look at this, now we're on condition 3. But the next condition we would want is when leaderboard, whatever, B2 to, or B3 to, let's say B2 to B1000, keeping everything consistent with our ranges, is equal to, and I'm going to go back to our leaderboard, whatever this gender is right here, and click enter. And what we could do here is we could just have this be a data validation. And sorry for going fast through this. I know it's been a long one. I'm just saying list of items. And this is just a different way of creating a list. And you could either be M, comma, F. Those are the 2 things that you can pick. And we'll click save. And now we can select M or F. And if I select F, there are my top 5 females. And here are my top 5 males. And you would do that for each of these things. So if you wanted grad year, what you would do is you would add in a column and you would do an index match, just like we did here for the grad year. And then what you could do is in this leaderboard, in the formula, you could just, at the end here, where you have your conditions, you just do another comma and say when the grad year in the leaderboard data set is equal to this grad year that we pick. And then you kind of have a lot of different selectors kind of going on at once. And that's I think that's what I got. And
I tell you what, I appreciate just like you talking as you go through it, and it's so so much easier for me to follow along when I've got like that narrator type thing going on. You know what I'm saying? So when you're looking at this leaderboard, and obviously I didn't have the scores in there to the side, this could be super easy for coaches to use. You know, like all of this data is coming from a tablet, an iPad being typed in on a Google form. So this could update real time dependent on the stuff that you have selected. And if not, I mean, like you do at the end of the class, you could refresh it, run the macro like Coach was talking about at the very beginning, and then you've got it. Like you could show this however many times you refresh a page or set that macro to work, you know, as soon as the form is updated or whatever it is, then you'd have the opportunity. So it could be an awesome way to use some competition type stuff in class also.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, if you don't have to do any calculations on your data, like if you're collecting flying tens or whatever it may be, and you run this thing directly off of the form, then it's going to be real time. Like someone enters in a piece of form information, it says it's a flying 10-10, then that leaderboard will update right away. And if you do apply that macro strategy, and then perform calculations off of that, like you're doing with, you know, we're calculating the TBDL 1RM and such. Again, you could have that macro run every time this thing is edited or every time a form is submitted. And then either way, you have an automatically updating leaderboard while people are working out.
So just to be clear with everyone, Coach is a whiz with this stuff, and obviously has put in a ton of time for this. So just wanted to tell you, Coach, thank you so much for taking time to do this. Thank you for just being able to break it down so easy and to help coaches out. And I'm excited for people to try this stuff out, to get it working. If you have questions, please reach out to him. If you'd like a copy of this leaderboard / dashboard type stuff, I can put that maybe in the show notes or just a link somewhere, or shoot me an email. I'd love for you guys to play around with this. I wrote down a list of people. So Colin Shoemate, Tolly Chapman, Richard Burnett, and obviously Coach Adam Virgile. All of these people have been just like so helpful in learning and helping me out and growing and just being so willing to, push our profession forward and help out as many student athletes as we can. So I really appreciate what you've done tonight, Coach. And if you want, is there anything else you want to sign off with or tell the listeners about?
No, I mean, just thank you for your time. You know, it takes two to tango. I appreciate your time and your insights, and it's really cool. One of the really fun things about doing kind of like what I do is like, I get to see like the cool things that people build. Like, without, you didn't do any of this with me. Like, yeah, I'm showing some stuff on here, but you know, this whole framework, your concept, what you're trying to do, that's all you. And that's really cool to see. So I hope that you continue to push the field forward as well, and impact others the way that you are.
I'm hopeful, man. Someday this is going to be like a video game is what I'm looking for. I stole that from Angelo James, and I think it's going to be something that hopefully I can get to. So, Coach, thank you. And for everyone that want to reach out to him, check out his stuff on YouTube, obviously, and then on Twitter. All of this stuff we'll put in the show notes. All of this stuff we'll put in the description. Thank you all for listening, taking the time, and watch out for our next one.